It was one of those perfect suburban evenings. The sky painted in soft hues of orange and pink, the sound of children laughing carried on a gentle breeze. My kids were out in the front yard, running barefoot through the grass, playing an innocent game of tag. Lily clutched her favorite unicorn plush as she dodged her older brother, while Aiden, ever the competitor, raced after her with determined glee. Their laughter was the kind of pure, unfiltered joy that made me feel like we had done something right in this chaotic world. I sat on the porch steps, nursing a cup of coffee, watching them play. The sun was low, but it was still early, barely 6 in the evening. It should have been an ordinary, peaceful moment. But ordinary had packed its bags and left our neighborhood the day Brenda moved in. And right then, I noticed her, Brenda, standing on her porch like a queen surveying her kingdom, arms crossed, lips pursed, nostrils flaring. Her eyes cold and calculating, fixed on my kids as if their laughter was some personal affront. I saw her muttering to herself, and I knew what was coming. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens cut through the air. I stood as the police cruiser rolled up, its lights flashing red and blue across our quiet street. It stopped with deliberate slowness, bathing our yard in an eerie glow. My heart thudded painfully as the door opened and an officer stepped out. He was older, with a lined face and tired eyes that told stories of 100 calls just like this. He glanced between me and Brenda, who now stood on my lawn as if she'd planted a flag there. Before I could speak, Brenda charged forward. "Officer," she barked, pointing toward my children with a trembling hand. "I've had enough of these hooligans disturbing the peace. You need to do something." The officer sighed and pulled out his notepad. "By hooligans," he said slowly, "you mean the children? Playing in their yard?" "Yes." Brenda snapped, her finger jabbing toward Lily and Aiden, who had stopped playing and now stood silently by the swing set. "They are loud, obnoxious, and I've told him," she stabbed a finger at me, "to control his brats, but he refuses. This is a clear violation of noise regulations." I took a deep breath, trying not to laugh at the absurdity of it all. "Officer," I said calmly, "they were playing tag." Brenda gasped as if I had confessed to a felony. She clutched her chest and staggered back dramatically. "Playing tag? At this hour?" "It's 6:15, I replied, checking my watch. The officer raised an eyebrow. "That's not exactly breaking curfew." Brenda's face twitched. "It's disturbing," she hissed. "I work hard. I deserve peace and quiet in my own neighborhood." And then, as if the universe had a sense of humor, Lily tugged on my sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, is that the mean lady who told us we have to play inside forever?" The officer's lips twitched, but he kept his composure. I wasn't nearly as disciplined. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, loud enough for Brenda to hear. "That's her." Brenda let out an exaggerated gasp. "This is harassment," she shrieked. "Officer, are you hearing this?" The officer exhaled. "Ma'am, do you have any evidence that these children are violating any laws?" Brenda squared her shoulders like a general preparing for battle. "I don't need evidence. I know the law. Children shouldn't be allowed to scream like wild animals whenever they please." The officer scribbled something on his notepad. Brenda's grin returned briefly, and then the officer looked up and said something that wiped the smugness right off her face. "I'm going to need to see your ID." Brenda blinked. "What? What?" The officer was patient. "Because you just admitted to knowingly making a false report." For a long second, Brenda stood frozen. Her mouth opened and closed like a broken toy. No. They were disturbing the peace." The officer tilted his head. At 6:15 p.m., her arms flailed wildly. "There are laws. I will not be disrespected." The officer closed his notepad. "Do you know what the penalty is for misusing emergency services?" Her cheeks turned crimson. "Penalty?" "Yes," he replied. "Wasting police resources can result in a fine. And from what I'm hearing, this isn't your first complaint, is it?" Brenda's gaze darted toward me, as if begging for help. I raised an eyebrow and smiled. "Oh, she's been at this for months," I offered helpfully. The officer nodded. "Then I'll need to file a report." Brenda's posture collapsed. Wait, you're finding me. That's how it works, he said, pulling out his ticket book. My kids started whispering excitedly, and even Lily giggled into her unicorn plushie. Brenda stomped her foot. I called you to do something about them. I did, the officer said calmly. I found no crime, except for yours. Brenda's fury was palpable. Her face twisted into something monstrous. This is insane. Abuse of power, she screamed. It's a $500 fine, the officer replied, tearing the ticket off the pad. Brenda snatched it from his hand like it burned. She glared at me, venom in her eyes. You'll regret this, she hissed. I slipped my hands into my pockets and smiled. I doubt it. And with that, she stormed off, crushing my kids' chalk drawings underfoot as she went. The war escalates. I thought the fine would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, Brenda stood on her front lawn, arms crossed, staring daggers at me as I stepped out for the paper. This isn't over, she announced. It's a fine, Brenda, I replied. Just pay it and move on. Her lips curled. You have no idea who you're messing with. She wasn't wrong. Brenda was a force of nature. If that nature was a tornado, fueled by self-righteous indignation. Later that day, she delivered an HOA warning to my door. An official complaint about excessive noise after hours. I read it twice and frowned. Brenda, I called across the lawn. This says the violation was at 10 p.m. Last night. Exactly, she crowed. They agree with me. We weren't home last night. We were out of town. Her face paled. That's not. It is, I said, pulling out my phone. Want to see the footage? Brenda backed away. That's unnecessary. I showed her anyway. Security footage. Empty driveway. Silent house. Her jaw clenched. You fake that. Sure, I said. I faked a vacation to catch you in a lie. Brenda turned and stormed back into her house. But I knew it wasn't over. Neighborhood united. I decided I'd had enough. I spoke with my neighbors. It turned out Brenda had terrorized them too, calling the HOA for water balloon fights, bike riding, even excessive splashing at the community pool. Together, we gathered statements, videos, and complaints. I brought everything to Greg at the HOA. We're investigating, he said. And if we can prove harassment, she's done. But Brenda wasn't going quietly. She spray-painted my mailbox with "Noisy brats live here." I caught on camera. Greg called an emergency board meeting. Brenda was fined, banned from filing complaints for a year, and warned that legal action was next. But Brenda? Brenda went door to door with a petition to have me removed. No one signed it. The fall of Brenda. 1 week later, Brenda dragged a for sale sign on her lawn. She stabbed it into the ground so hard I thought it might snap in half. Greg called me. She's selling, he confirmed. I watched as movers packed her belongings. Brenda stayed silent, her head down. And when she drove away, the entire neighborhood exhaled. Peace at last. Life returned to normal. Kids played without fear. Neighbors smiled again. A new family moved into Brenda's house. A young couple with 2 kids. Their first act? Drawing sidewalk chalk pictures in the driveway. Nobody stopped them. And this time, nobody ever would.